In the glittering world of entertainment, where image is carefully crafted and public perception can make or break careers, there exists a shadowy practice with devastating psychological consequences. Behind the sparkle of fame lies the reality of closeting, the industry practice of concealing an entertainer's sexual orientation or gender identity from the public. Today, we explore the psychological research on this phenomenon, examining the toll it takes on mental health, creative expression, and personal identity. While our case studies are composite characters based on documented experiences, the psychological impacts we'll discuss are drawn from peer-reviewed research on this industry practice. The entertainment industry has long operated on carefully constructed images. Dr. Catherine Reynolds, a clinical psychologist specializing in entertainment industry mental health, explains that the practice of closeting in entertainment isn't simply about individual choices. It's an institutional mechanism with formal and informal enforcement. Contracts may include morality clauses, PR teams develop heteronormative narratives, the management creates opposite sex relationships, quote unquote, for publicity. This creates an environment where authenticity becomes professionally dangerous. According to a study published in the Journal of Occupational Health Psychology by Ragan, Singh, and Cornwall in 2007, concealing one's sexual identity in the workplace is associated with higher levels of psychological distress and anxiety. The research found that fear of negative consequences from disclosure was directly linked to increased psychological strain and reduced job satisfaction. For our first case study, we examined Edward, a composite character based on young male performers in boy bands from the 2010s. Edward signed his first major contract at 16. The initial conversation seemed supportive, but subtly grew and shifted as his fame increased. At first, they said things like, "We support you no matter what, but let's focus on the music right now." The demographic research shows our audience is primarily young girls who fantasize about dating you. Eventually, it was explicit. Your contract requires maintaining a marketable image, and right now, that means appearing available to female fans. Dr. Reynolds has noted in her research that this progression is common. What begins as postponement often becomes prohibition. Young performers, especially, may not recognize the psychological commitment they're making when they agree to just not talk about it for now. They're establishing a pattern of compartmentalization that becomes increasingly difficult to break. So, research from the American Psychological Association identifies several psychological mechanisms that make closeting particularly damaging in high profile entertainment contexts. Dr. Michael Louis, a researcher at UCLA's Entertainment Media Laboratory, explains high visibility closeting creates a unique psychological burden we call amplified identity bifurcation. Not only must performers maintain separate public and private identities, but they must do so while constantly being observed, recorded, and scrutinized. This cognitive load is enormous. Pachankis in 2007 had influential work published in Psychological Bulletin and outlined a comprehensive model of psychological implications of concealing stigmatized identities. His research demonstrated that concealment affects individuals through both cognitive processes, preoccupation, vigilance, suspiciousness, and social interactions, increased social anxiety, impression management, and a more recent study by Tatum in 2017 that was published in the Journal of Counseling Psychology confirmed these findings, showing measurable effects on 1, reduced working memory capacity, 2, diminished creative problem-solving abilities, 3, impaired emotional regulation, 4, heightened stress responses to normal social interactions. For Edward, this manifested in increasingly visible ways. In interviews, I'd freeze up when asked about my dating. My mind would race through all the possible ways I might accidentally reveal something. Sometimes I'd completely forget the question. Other times, I'd give these robotic, rehearsed answers. Fans noticed and thought I was being mysterious or arrogant, but I was just trying to survive the moment. Dr. Reynolds identifies this as hypervigilance overflow. So, as Dr. Reynolds says, the brain can only maintain that level of self-monitoring for so long before it begins to affect basic functions. Many closeted performers report autobiographical memory gaps from this period. Their brains were so occupied with self-censoring that they weren't properly encoding experiences into long-term memory. And perhaps the most psychologically damaging aspect of industry closeting is the practice of what is known as beard relationships, contractually arranged opposite-sex relationships designed to protect heterosexuality. Dr. Simon Chen, researcher specializing in entertainment industry ethics, explains arranged relationships create profound identity disruption. The performer must not only hide their authentic self, but actively perform a false narrative. This isn't simply omission, it's commission of a continuous deception that becomes part of their public biography. In Mayer's 2003 Minority Stress Theory that was published in Psychological Bulletin, it provides a framework for understanding this phenomenon. His research established that the need to constantly monitor, hide, and fabricate elements of one's identity creates a form of chronic stress unique to stigmatized minorities. This pattern of concealment and fabrication has been linked to what psychologists Cole, Kameni, and Taylor identified as accelerated cellular aging in their research published in Health Psychology. So for our second case study, we'll look at Eliza, a composite character based on young female performers who experienced this practice. The strange part was having to study the relationship like a role. I had briefings about his favorite restaurants, his family members' names, inside jokes we supposedly shared. I had to maintain a detailed fiction while cameras followed us. The public tracked our relationship timeline more accurately than I could. Fans would mention our anniversary, and I'd panic because I couldn't remember which fabricated date they meant. Dr. Reynolds notes how this affects identity formation. Young performers are still developing their sense of self. When you introduce fictional romantic histories during this crucial period, it creates profound confusion. Some clients report difficulty distinguishing between authentic memories and staged publicity events. This undermines the basic autobiographical coherence necessary for healthy identity. A unique aspect of entertainment industry closeting is the public speculation it generates. Unlike other professionals who may conceal their identity, performers face constant analysis of their words, actions, and relationships. Dr. Liu explains the psychological impact. As such, our research shows a phenomenon we call panoptic identity stress. The performer knows they're being watched for evidence, creating a secondary layer of self-consciousness. Even authentic moments become suspect to them. Will this gesture reveal too much? This creates a state of constant performance without safe spaces for authentic expression. This mirrors what Foucault conceptualized as the panopticon effect, the psychological impact of believing one is constantly under surveillance. Research by Halstenbuehler, published in 2009 in the Psychological Bulletin, found that this type of scrutiny creates heightened physiological stress responses affecting both mental and physical health in individuals concealing stigmatized identities. For Edward, fan theories about his relationship with a bandmate created additional complexities. The fan theories about my relationship with my bandmate were actually correct, but we still had to deny them. So we were lying to confirm a lie, which felt even worse than just hiding the truth. Management would monitor fan forums and alert us to new evidence we needed to counter. Sometimes they specifically staged situations to disprove particularly convincing theories. The hardest part was that these fans were actually seeing something real. They were connecting with our authentic moments that accidentally slipped through. This phenomenon aligns with research by Owens in 2017, published in the Journal of Homosexuality, which examined the psychological impact of shipping when fans theorize romantic relationships between celebrities. Owens found that for closeted celebrities, being shipped in ways that align with their actual orientation created significant cognitive dissonance and identity conflict. This research demonstrated that the need to refute accurate perceptions was more psychologically damaging than refuting inaccurate ones. Dr. Chan notes the unique ethical dilemma this creates. This places the performer in the position of gaslighting their most dedicated fans. They must explicitly deny accurate perceptions, creating a fundamental break in authentic connection with their audience. Our research shows this creates what we call inverted authenticity distress. The more perceptive the fan, the more the performer must reject them. This pattern is further documented in McEnroy and Craig's 2018 research in the Journal of Youth Studies, which found that celebrity denials of LGBTQ+ identity that later proved false had measurable negative impacts on LGBTQ plus youth who had identified with those celebrities, creating what they termed representational betrayal trauma. For many performers, their art serves as an emotional outlet. Closeting disrupts this crucial psychological release mechanism. Dr. Reynolds explains, creative expression is a fundamental psychological need for performers. When certain themes, pronouns, or experiences become forbidden territory, it creates what we call expressive constriction syndrome. The very mechanism that should provide relief becomes another source of surveillance and constraint. This aligns with research by Pennebaker and Chung, published in the Oxford Handbook of Health Psychology, which demonstrated that emotional disclosure through creative expression has significant psychological and physical health benefits. Their studies show that inhibiting emotional expression leads to increased stress hormones and decreased immune function. The composite character Eliza describes this experience. I'd write songs using gender-neutral language, but then face meetings about making lyrics clearer, meaning more explicitly heterosexual. Eventually, I stopped bringing in certain types of songs entirely. My most personal experiences became unspeakable in my art. The songs that made me most proud never left my private notebook. Dr. Louis identifies the long-term creative impact. Our longitudinal studies show that prolonged expressive constriction affects creative confidence beyond the closeting period. Even after coming out, many performers report a persistent internal censor that limits artistic choices. Some describe it as a creative phantom limb. They feel the restriction even after it's technically gone. So the psychological pressure of maintaining a closeted public persona correlates strongly with problematic coping mechanisms. Dr. Chen cites in his research a meta-analysis by Hughes in 2020 published in JAMA Psychiatry found that LGBTQ plus individuals experience substance use disorders at 2.5 times the rate of heterosexual cisgender individuals, with those experiencing identity concealment showing particularly elevated risk. For our composite character Edward, alcohol became a management tool. I started drinking before interviews because it made the lying easier. Then I needed it for public appearances. Eventually, I was drinking to get through meet and greets with fans. The guilt was overwhelming. These young people adored a person who didn't really exist, and alcohol blurred that reality enough to function. Dr. Reynolds explains the psychological mechanisms. Substance use temporarily relieves the cognitive dissonance of living a divided life. It creates emotional distance from the deception reducing the acute psychological pain. Unfortunately, this begins a cycle that often escalates as tolerance develops. This pattern is consistent with Hatzenbuller's research in 2009, showing that the identity concealment creates psychological mediation processes, including rumination, social isolation, and maladaptive coping that significantly increase risk for mental health and substance use disorders. Psychological effects of closeting extend beyond the individual to impact intimate relationships. These effects are particularly complex when the relationship exists within the same professional environment. Dr. Liu explains, our research identifies a pattern we call intimacy compartmentalization disorder. The habit of hiding becomes so ingrained that authentic relationships suffer. Performers report difficulty transitioning between public deception and private authenticity, creating emotional barriers even with trusted partners. And this aligns with research by Riggle in the 2017 published in the Journal of Counseling Psychology, which found that concealment creates significant challenges in relationship development and maintenance, including difficulty with emotional intimacy and trust formation. For our composite character Edward, the situation was further complicated by falling in love with a fellow band member who was also closeted. We were together, but couldn't be together. Sometimes we'd be inches apart in interviews while someone asked which female celebrities we had crushes on. We developed this complex nonverbal language, ways to communicate affection that fans wouldn't recognize, but we would. The psychological toll was immense. We'd go from complete intimacy in private to pretending we were just friends in public, sometimes within minutes. Research by Frost, published in the Journal of Social Issues in 2017, specifically examined concealment in same-sex relationships, finding that couples who conceal their relationships experience chronic vigilance, a state of constantly monitoring that depletes cognitive resources and increases minority stress. The research demonstrated that this vigilance is particularly intense when the couple must regularly interact in public settings where they cannot acknowledge their relationship. Dr. Chen elaborates on this unique dynamic. When both partners are closeted within the same professional environment, we see what we call compound concealment stress. Not only must each individual manage their own concealment, but they must also coordinate their concealment strategies with each other. This creates a multiplicative rather than additive stress burden. Our composite character Eliza describes a similar reality. My real relationships had to be completely hidden, which meant my partners became secrets. Every genuine connection was shadowed by NDAs, separate entrances, and elaborate cover stories. One partner called it loving a ghost. I couldn't fully exist in her life. Eventually, most couldn't handle being treated as shameful secrets, no matter how much they understood the professional reasons. Dr. Reynolds identifies the attachment implications. This creates a profound attachment paradox. The individual most needs secure attachment during the stressful period, but is simultaneously required to undermine the conditions that create relationship security. Many develop what we call industrial attachment disorder, the belief that authentic connection is incompatible with professional success. This pattern is supported by Lehmiller's 2012 research in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships on secret romances, which found that relationship secrecy was associated with lower commitment, more harmful conflict patterns, and higher physical and psychological stress markers. Importantly, his research showed that when secrecy was externally imposed rather than chosen, these negative effects were significantly intensified. For same-sex couples in high-visibility environments, Humberson found in 2015 in their research published in the Journal of Marriage and Family that the constant need to desexualize their interactions in public created what they termed intimacy confusion, difficulty distinguishing between authentic intimacy needs and performative behaviors developed for public consumption. Research by Diamond in 2003 and Psychological Bulletin established that secure attachment relationships serve as crucial buffers against psychological distress. The systemic disruption of these protective relationships represents a significant vulnerability factor for those experiencing forced closeting. Even after coming out, research shows that the psychological effects of industry closeting can persist for years. Dr. Chen explains, research by Russell and Fish, published in the Annual Review of Clinical Psychology in 2016, found that the effects of minority stress persist well beyond the period of the active concealment. They identified lasting impacts on trust, emotional regulation, and social functioning that can continue for years without targeted intervention. Our competent character Edward explains his experience. After I finally came out, I expected immediate relief. Instead, I felt disoriented. I'd spent so long calibrating every word and gesture that authenticity felt dangerous. In interviews, I'd still automatically reach for the practiced lie before remembering I could tell the truth. It took years of therapy to recalibrate my instincts. Dr. Reynolds outlines the recovery process. Recovery follows a predictable pattern we call reintegration sequencing. First comes narrative reconstruction, making sense of the closeted period within their life story. Then identity reclamation, distinguishing between authentic traits and those developed for protection. Finally, relational recalibration, learning to connect without the reflective guardedness that became habitual. This approach is supported by Pachankis in 2015. His research, published in the Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology, which found that cognitive behavioral interventions specifically addressing minority stress significantly improved mental health outcomes for individuals who had experienced prolonged concealment. Our competent character Eliza reflects on her healing journey. The hardest part was forgiving myself. I'd internalized so much shame, not just about my identity, but about the deception I had participated in. I had to understand that survival isn't the same as dishonesty. I wasn't protecting a lie. I was protecting myself in the only way available at the time. Recent years have seen some evolution in entertainment industry practices, though progress remains uneven. Dr. Liu notes these changes. The industry surveys show a significant reduction in explicit closeting demands for new artists compared to 10 years ago. However, subtler forms of image guidance persist. The psychological impact depends largely on whether performers perceive authentic choice and how they present themselves publicly. This aligns with research by Feinstein in 2020, published in the Psychology of Sexual Orientation and Gender Diversity, which found that perceived autonomy and disclosure decisions significantly mediated the relationship between concealment and psychological distress. Dr. Chen explains the current landscape. The industry has shifted from prohibition to postponement. Many management teams now frame closeting as temporary career strategy rather than permanent requirement. This creates different but still significant psychological burdens, as performers must constantly evaluate whether they've reached sufficient career stability to risk authenticity. For younger performers like composite character Noah, this creates new challenges. So this is another composite character. My team says they support me coming out when the time is right, but that mysterious right time keeps shifting after the album release, after the tour, after the film role. It's not an explicit no, but the outcome is the same. I'm still hiding, just with the promise that someday I won't have to. Dr. Reynolds identified harm reduction strategies. So our research shows that the psychological impact is significantly reduced when performers have one, explicit timeline agreements rather than open-ended concealment, two, designated private spaces where authenticity is completely safe, and three, professional support specifically trained in identity concealment stress. Without these protections, even temporary closeting creates lasting harm. These recommendations align with Pachankas's research that was published in an annual review on clinical psychology on the clinical approaches to reducing minority stress, which emphasizes the importance of safe spaces, community connection, and targeted therapeutic support. So in conclusion, as our understanding of the psychological impacts of closeting grows, both performers and industry professionals have opportunities to create healthier practices. And Dr. Chen outlines this in research-backed recommendations. The evidence clearly shows that forced closeting creates documented psychological harm. Entertainment contracts now routinely account for physical safety. They must evolve to address psychological safety as well. This includes explicit identity expression rights, limitations on fictional relationship requirements, and access to specialized mental health support. And Dr. Liu emphasizes the broader implications. Our research demonstrates that the psychological cost of closeting ultimately undermines the very commercial goals it aims to serve. Performers experiencing identity concealment stress show reduced creative output, shorter career longevity, and higher project withdrawal rates. Authentic expression isn't just ethically necessary, it's commercially sustainable. And this position is supported by Badgett and 2013 research for the Williams Institute, which found that inclusive policies and practices led to improved workplace outcomes, including higher job satisfaction, better health outcomes, and increased productivity amongst LGBTQ+ workers. Dr. Reynolds concludes with a message for those still experiencing this pressure. To anyone currently navigating these challenges, the psychological impacts you're experiencing are real, documented, and not your fault. They're predictable responses to an untenable situation. Recovery is possible. Many who've walked this path before you are now leading healthy, authentic lives, both personally and professionally. As the entertainment industry continues to evolve, the research is clear. The psychological cost of closeting is too high for individuals, for creative expression, and ultimately for the cultural landscape as a whole. The path forward lies not in more convincing concealment, but in creating an industry where authenticity is recognized as both a human need and a creative asset. Behind every carefully constructed public image of a real human being navigating complex psychological terrain. By understanding the true impact of closeting practices, we move toward an entertainment industry that celebrates authentic expression rather than strategic fabrication, benefiting performers and audiences alike. So, with individuals like Lance Bass, who finally came out and explained how he was put into a closeting situation, as well as Jordan Knight, who was also told that if he was to come out, it would ruin a big CBS deal and all this money was riding on him. All of this was pressure put on individuals who at the time were in their late teens, early 20s. And to navigate both that stage in life plus the unusual demands of an entertainment industry where so much money is on the line creates a challenge that few peers available to them can be found, especially when everyone was being closeted. So hopefully, with the increase in acceptance and human rights, this kind of unnecessary practice can be Let's just face it, it should be banned.
Okay, so that was a pre-recording that I had to overplay to put into this video. And the more I stumbled upon Larry. So I don't know if I ever talked about how I stumbled upon Larry. Well, I kind of have talked about it, but the interesting other aspect of how I ended up in this fandom that I was always on the outskirts of was because, crazy as it sounds, because Hugh Jackman cheated on his wife with a Broadway co-star, and after that, I'm like, "I'm done with you, Wolverine, I'm done with you." I always thought it was a little strange that Hugh Jackman was with his ex-wife, even though I really like her. Like, Deborah Lee Furness is, I think she's a class act, because they didn't seem to have that sort of, je ne sais quoi, which is like the French, I don't know what it is, but it's there. And when he left, it was almost an inevitability. It's the manner in which he left that was really disgusting to me. And compound that with him participating in Ryan Reynolds' bullying of Justin Baldoni, who was innocent, who, in my opinion, is innocent. I don't know anything. That was it. And I naturally steered towards Harry Styles because he too was a performer. And Hugh Jackman is a good showman, but Harry Styles is a better one. But when I stumbled upon Harry Styles and then the Larry uh, zeitgeist, I saw what I didn't see in Hugh Jackman and his wife, and even with his new beard, because I'm convinced Hugh Jackman just switched beards, honestly. Um, because there's been rumors about Hugh Jackman for years and they don't go away. And you know what Elton John says? It was a rumor that persists long enough. It ain't a rumor. So anyway, whether Hugh Jackman just switched beards or whether it's a really he did cheat. 27 years is a long time to have a beard, but we all know that if you really want to cover up something, you have a beard that is long standing, such as the case of Eleanor, who is believed by many fans to be a beard. And uh, I'm not going to go into the Eleanor thing right now, but um, when I saw Larry, I saw what I didn't see with Hugh and Deb and Hugh and his new beard is that there was really this devotion. It's like even if you completely had no idea that the Larry fandom existed, if you were just someone who doesn't even care for music, you just would watch the body language. And if you watch the body language and you take out the sound that were like all the footage over all the years that One Direction was active, you would come to the conclusion something was going on. The only way you would not come to the conclusion that there wasn't more than just a deep friendship between these two is if you were homophobic and you have blinders on because of it. But all I can say is I'm still glad that I left the Hugh Jackman fandom for the Harry Styles and Louis Tomlinson one because Louis was always my favorite, Louis and Niall. And I haven't given enough airtime to Niall, which I really need to get to. But I am uploading the Liam tribute, but it's taking forever to upload. I don't know why. I've been trying, I keep uploading it and everything else I upload. It's there within an hour, but the Liam one, it's been uploading since yesterday. So I don't know what's going on. Anyway, uh, I do have a Liam one coming, and it's not up to me. It seems to be up to the system.